Welcome. So glad to have you. We are here with the co-winemaking team, father and daughter winemaking team, Yiannis and Leto from GAI'A Paraskevopoulos.
Close.
I missed it again. It's the Lupos. Paraskevopoulos. Well, you know.
It's fine. GAI'A is nice and easy.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And it's GAI'A, not GAI'A.
It's GAI'A. It's the same. Doesn't matter.
Okay. Oh, okay. Very good. Because I was like, wow, all this time I've been saying it wrong.
No, it means the same thing.
Yes.
GAI'A is already a thing in English as well. So.
And it means
Mother Earth.
Okay, great, awesome. I'm glad to have you both with us. We had an audience yesterday for just an overview of Greece in general and the important regions, and we had about 220 people tune into that nationally. And I hope some of them are on the call now. But we're going to basically start to address some things that are really specific to your regions. Leto, you're joining us from Santorini, right? And your father's joining us from Peloponnese. Are you right in Nemea or are you outside of the region?
No, actually I just drove back to Athens. It was my last day at the winery.
All right.
So I just arrived at my house in Athens.
Okay. Fabulous.
Fortunately, it's just an hour's drive, so it's not that much of a deal.
Yeah, that is very convenient. That way you can have both the country life and the city life all at the same time.
Totally, yes.
It's nothing by American standards as well.
Yeah. So why don't we start with Peloponnese?
Let's do so.
And so we have yet to really see the full potential of Peloponnese, I think, as a region, certainly in this country. And I think when I was in Greece, I found some wines that we don't see here that I thought were really pushing the boundary up in quality. And some of them we still see here that are getting better, like your top tier wines. So in the modern context of wine, instead of what people think about Greece, if they haven't had an experience in the last 5 or 6 years or 10 years, what are the key regional factors that give it world-class potential as a greater region?
All right, fine. Ron, I'd like to project some images. If I go on the share screen.
Yeah, go right ahead. You can,
right.
You can take the share from me. Now that everybody knows who we are and what we're trying to do.
All right. Let me get that. Just 1 second and we should be okay.
Sure.
You know, we have to talk about a bit about geography.
Yes.
Otherwise,
absolutely.
things don't really go into our head. Mm-hmm. So basically, the Peloponnese is this little peninsula that I've circled. It's a peninsula. It looks like a hand at the very south tip of Greece. And then if we put that into perspective and compare it to California, well, what we see first of all, it is that Peloponnese is quite small. It's like 20 times smaller than California in size. And it actually, the latitude that I have set on this screen, it is the correct one, which means that the north tip of Peloponnesus is just Napa, where the south tip of the Peloponnese, it is just south of the Monterey Bay. Mm-hmm. So basically it's totally centered in the middle of California. Now, although small, it's quite diverse in terms of soil, in terms of climate, and thus then very diverse in terms of vineyards and winemaking. I know, you know, it's a bit strange when you ask winemakers worldwide about their area. You rarely get an objective response. You know, we are biased. We are biased because we love our area. We have invested heavily, both economically and emotionally. So, nevertheless, I'll try to do my best and try to be as more objective as possible. So, yes, Peloponnese is small, but then highly diverse. I know that you guys think of images like that when you hear the word Greece. Mm-hmm. This image of the Peloponnesus coastline. So you all think about blue sea, eternal summer, or, you know, places like this one, which is a very typical beach of the Peloponnese.
Mm-hmm.
What you never think, though, is about that.
Right.
Greece is just about mountains. And Peloponnesos, it's nothing but a very mountainous area. We have, I think, like 10 peaks that overshoot 6,000 feet. Mm-hmm. So it's seriously high. And then our vineyards, although we are a country of the European South, well, our vineyards are at a very high altitude and often under snow. And then it's not surprising to see that on the same time we have wines that have, at least 14% alcohol because of the sun, but on the same time, a very, very crisp acidity.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, although we are seen as a country for summer vacations, in reality, sometimes we have cold climate viticulture. Mm-hmm. And I think what consumers start to realize is that, well, when we experience Greek wines, we get all this freshness and all this fruit and all this acidity. Well, it's all linked to high altitude. Mm-hmm. So, well, there they go to the winery. It's at 1,800 feet of elevation. Quite warm during summer, but quite cold in winter. And then we are still lucky. And as I said, still lucky, we can still experience all 4 seasons, mm-hmm. although things do change, unfortunately. We start to see global warming in quite an upsetting way. But that's a long discussion, nevertheless.
Yeah, that's way more than 30 minutes.
Yeah, true, unfortunately.
Try to stay off it, really. It's hard not to...
Yeah. Funny, Greece, Greece it's a small country. And in spite of that, for instance, on the islands, global warming isn't yet that obvious because basically the water surrounding mm-hmm. those small islands acts like a buffer. Mm-hmm. And it regulates things still. On the mainland, though, oh my God, it is the weather pattern that we do experience today. It's so different than when I started 30 years ago. Very, very different. The upsetting thing is that in each area, grapes have developed and they evolved mm-hmm. for being more suitable for the climate that existed in the past. Right. So yeah, Nemea, think of it, and the Peloponnese, as I said, the latitude, it's Napa. Nevertheless, climatically, it's more Toscan-like. And if you see the nature, the plants that we get, it's cypress trees, olive trees, and vineyards. Mm-hmm. It is exactly the same vegetation that you get in Tuscany, basically. Mm-hmm. And not surprisingly, our grape, Agorgitico, it has quite some similarities with Sangiovese. So, yes, the Peloponnese, if you may, I think it is one of the most interesting areas of Greece. It holds 7 out of all 33 PDO areas that we have in the country. And then also 15 out of the 79 PGIs. The difference of the Peloponnesos compared to the rest of the country, it is that, well, basically, we deal only with Greek varieties. It is very, very rare to have a non-Greek vineyard with non-Greek varieties in the Peloponnesos. Where in the Greek north, things are more recent. Yeah. The vineyards have been planted more recently, and then it's quite common to find, the non-Greek French varieties being planted there. Not in Peloponnesos, though. I have to apologize. I say Peloponnesos. It's the Greek way of saying Peloponnese.
I'm good with it. I think the audience is figuring that out. We have no
Well,
questions there.
us Greeks have at least 3 different ways to say the same thing.
Yes, and 4 different ways to spell it in Latin-based letters too. It's really a challenge for those of us on the other side, but it's fun. Actually, this idea of the youthfulness of the North we talked about yesterday when we dealt with Macedonia is the Ottoman rule. It just sort of eliminated vineyard landscape there over the course of time. And so when we came back to Greek independence, we're basically starting over in the North, and really not in earnest until the 1960s, when everybody was drinking French wine. So it made a lot more sense if you're going to plant for something that people are actually drinking. And so the mix up there is different from the way it looks from the outside looking in anyway.
Yes, and they actually, it is so very different, and there is more availability of land to buy and plant. Land is much, much cheaper than it is in the south of Greece, in the Peloponnese. The economics are very, very different, but also the fact that they do have mainly PGIs, and PGIs allow a certain level of freedom. You may plant practically whatever you wish, where the South is very strict. The South is nothing but tradition. And you know, Ron, the Greek system, it is the same with the European system. The PDO system, it's identical in all European countries. The beauty in our case is that practically each one of those PDOs corresponds at 100% to one Greek variety. For instance, when you say the PDO of Nemea, as we are in the Peloponnese, well, it is 100% Agorgetico. When you're referring to the PDO Mandinia, it is 100% the grape Moscofilero. When you're referring to your beloved PDO Nausa in the north, it is 100% Xenomavro. So the Greek system, it is very, very easy to grasp. It is so simple. Even if one can't remember or can't pronounce the word Agorgetico, that's okay. They can always say the red grape of Nemea, because basically it is the same thing, since Nemea is 100% Agorgetico.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing that matches up to most of Piemonte, Italy, and certainly in Burgundy. You can just say Burgundy and it's either white or red, and it's beautiful, it's perfect.
You're so right.
So all of those things are good.
Although climatically we are more, I would say, Toscanese, in mentality, it's totally Piemonte. We do one thing, we do that. It may be a bit restrictive in some cases, but then makes it so much easier. And you know what? At the end of the day, the beauty of the system is that since each PDO corresponds basically at 100% to one variety, eyes shut, you can tell the difference between a PDO Nemea and a PDO Nausa.
Oh, yeah.
So I would ask you, Ron, okay, eyes shut, are you sure that you can make the difference between Appellation Saint-Julien and Appellation Saint-Estèphe?
No. I mean, there's the good guess maybe one day, you throw a rock at the right direction occasionally. And there was a point in time where maybe it was a little more clear, but with modern winemaking trends and people getting better at what they do and microbiology not dominating the flavor profile as much as it once did, then these great wine regions made from the same grapes start to taste a lot alike. You can miss them easily.
True.
And but you know, Yiannis, I want Leto to at least have some time here. So let's come back to our Agorgetico.
Absolutely. This is my last thing. This is the berry.
Okay, go ahead.
Agorgetico. I know you guys have a certain difficulty. You can refer to it as St. George.
God, that phonetic is worse, I swear.
Americans tend to bypass the second G, the red one, and they say Agorgetico, which is a different thing. It's Agorgetico,
isn't it? Or a bread or something. Can't remember now.
I don't know. Agorgetico.
That's the one. Nice.
And yes, I have Madeline Trufant to thank for that. It's always nice to know someone who speaks Greek when you're trying to learn these words. So let's talk about Santorini for a minute. I'm coming back to Agorgetico as a grape with you, okay, Yiannis? I want to explore that grape for its real potential and why we need to be paying attention to it now for the future. And Leto, let's talk about Santorini, because certainly, you know, when the wine world in America automatically talks about Santorini, and it's really good for Greece that Santorini has become what it is, because it put the idea that at least one, I know there's way more than that, but in the mind of the world outside of Greece, there's at least one place that's like, wow, that wine's so good and so identifiable. And so let's talk about Santorini for what it is. I mean, if you want to run us through the history very briefly or whatever, but you know, the depth of the ash on top of the bedrock, whatever you think really is what makes Santorini unique other than this. Go right ahead.
Yeah. I mean, you said history, but it's really more like prehistory, because the wine has been there forever. The vineyards have been there forever, since literally since we know things. And I mean, yeah, we know it's a volcano. That's pretty much the first thing that pops up in Google when you Google Santorini. But it's, you know, we think of volcanoes, what we know is that they are fertile soil. But that's not the case here. In the case of Santorini, it's very poor with good drainage. So, you know, it's counterintuitive a little bit, but then again, so is the wine. I mean, here we are this far south making white wine with good old southern volume, yes, but also like way northern acidities and minerality. So we get all the best of all worlds, really. And it's all because of that, of the terroir, obviously. So it might be volcanic, but it's unusual volcanic soil. And it's not just that. We do get a very harsh climate, very strong winds, very strong heat waves. That looks right back to the wine culture through the way that the vines are cultivated, which is the traditional system. So the kulura, I think we have a picture, there you go. So that only gets done here, really. And this is to protect the grapes from the intense winds and from the sunshine. And we know that it works because we've tried to train vineyards classically, like in a standard way, linear. And let me tell you, in the case of strong winds, in the case of an intense heat wave, those are the first to go. So we are experimenting with other ways of training, but always low on the ground. And this is some knowledge that it's locked literally in the brains of the locals. It doesn't get taught in university. So it's coming to the point now where I think that academic presence on the island in viticulture is becoming increasingly important if we want to preserve this. But yeah,
so basically somebody's got to take charge of getting to these very small number of vineyard managers that are living there and have been doing this their whole lives.
Exactly.
And get them to tell you everything, and somebody record it for the future. Turn down this oral history into written or at least digital format for other people.
I mean, anything at this point.
Super
really
important. And, you know, the only other region that sort of reminds me of this methodology is what they're doing in Kolaris, which is disappearing. And that was, instead of doing the kulura, they're basically growing the vines below ground level in trenches or on
that's right.
For the same reasons, to protect against wind. And if anybody wants to look up on Google and Google Etesian wind, ETESIAN, they'll get the idea of why Santorini, you cannot trellis in a normal up and down situation. Just look at the weather map and look at the sustained winds that generates on a regular basis, and you're like, I get it, can't do it. So that's cool. Keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was going to say that people say there's this saying of like, can an old dog learn new tricks? And it's kind of the case here, because these vineyards are literally ancient. They've been here forever, and they've learned to do what they do in that morphology. So we're actually quite scared to tamper with it. It's not, wouldn't be very wise, because those are the original root systems. They are engrafted. They are autonomous. They never got killed off by phylloxera or anything. So I mean, yeah, they've literally, that's what they do, and this is how they do it.
Yeah,
I've always done it.
I just want to mention to the audience that Leto does not have, in case you're ever in Santorini, that is not the English accent of Santorini. I think she went to school in Edinburgh. Okay, so the geology, the uniqueness, the isolation of Santorini, that's always what we immediately link to. Are there any myths you would like us to dispel in the audience? Like we were talking earlier, and someone had led me to believe that when this culura that's described here becomes unproductive, that they would cut off the top and put a shoot onto the graft. But you're like, no, you just cut off the top. You had a different description for it to get the old root to start a new
well, yeah, this is one way to renew the vineyard. It's not to uproot, but basically it's like have a haircut. When your hair gets super long and it gets really weak, you chop it off so that the root can strengthen. It's the same idea. You just chop off the bit and let the root, let the plant regrow. Another way is to just take it and put all of it in the ground. So the whole thing becomes more root, a lot of root, and then it reshoots. But you talked about a myth to debunk. I guess that would be irrigation. I mean, our PDO specifications do specify no irrigation, and that's true. It's also true that we don't irrigate because basically so far we don't really need to because we don't have rain, we have a lot of humidity, and we have this very porous ground we saw in the picture, pumice stone. So that's like a sponge, it retains all the humidity, and that's enough water. But things are changing, and by things I mean the climate. So we get very unstable weather patterns. We don't get the rain that we want when we want it, and that's very important because we do get rain, but at the wrong time of year. So if we want to hold on to the typicality, we are going to have to irrigate in order to simulate the times of year on which the typicality is based. So eventually that's going to have to happen. And we already see that the vineyards are, they're stressed and then there's on their deathbed. So and it's actually got better. We had a 3-year drought and we thought that was going to be it. Thankfully we came out of it, but it's not sustainable. It's not predictable. And it's not, we can't rely on it anymore. So I think that eventually we're going to have to change the PDO specifications so that we can irrigate to simulate
if
cool.
I may
jump in, and then we're going to talk about Ayuritico.
Well, the fact that this soil, I mean, if you really want to understand what terroir means, you have to go and taste Santorini wines because all the attributes that the wines do have are linked to the soil. The fact that we have zero clay in this soil basically does that it is impossible to have a water bed. It is impossible to have
no aquifer.
Cannot retain water. So yields obviously shoot dramatically, basically because of that. And we have yields that are like 20 hectoliters per hectare, which are really, really low. So the wines become extremely concentrated. And also, there are all those minerals being a volcanic soil, but there is no potassium. So acidity, the pH drops below 3. It's even below Riesling, Rheinegau Riesling. So it is quite freaky. One thing is certain. We have to reinvent viticulture. And it doesn't please me to say so, but we need to reinvent viticulture on the island for reasons of economic sustainability. We have less and less growers that will do the vines. And, just to prune these vines in this way, it takes, 6 months. So we have less and less manpower, and this is very manpower demanding. As we have less and less manpower, we'll have to find other ways, more economically efficient, to go forward in the future. As I said, it doesn't please me because it might mean that we might be obliged to abandon, to a percentage at least, this beautiful and unique way of doing wines. But as it goes right now, and I mean, I'm sure you've seen that on the prices of Assyrtiko wines. Prices are skyrocketing because one, there's more and more demand worldwide as Assyrtiko gains momentum, and there's less and less grapes from Santorini.
Yeah, and I think that actually, while that's discouraging for those of us who absolutely adore Santorini and want to maintain our connection with it as often as possible, meaning drinking a bottle as often as possible, there's also an encouragement in there for me. And I'm gonna make this comment and then flip to Ayurvedico for a few minutes, and that is that the advantage of Assyrtiko, more specifically, the advantage of prices of current Santorini and what they will become in the future is that it's more and more motivating for mainland Assyrtiko, for Greece, and Assyrtiko in other places of the world to start showing that this is indeed one of the most noble of white wine grapes. It has great potential, not just on Santorini, but in other places as well. And we're going to see that have greater economic motivation in other places like Peloponnesos and in Macedonia and other places where you can see that now there's, like this picture is perfect. There's one from Lebanon. There's one from South Australia. There's one from yours, Thalassites, and then one from Peloponnesos. And all of those wines have a legitimate stake in the conversation about Assyrtiko because it's a great grape. And I think that's why we need to address Ayurvedico so carefully, because I think it is also a great grape that we need to understand more about what it's about. So, walk us through the idea of the potential of Ayurvedico and what we should expect from it in general, and then and in the specifics of how it fits into Nemea. Yesterday in our webinar, we talked about the altitude bands in Nemea, the sort of 3 sections of altitude, and how that really does dictate the end product in a lot of ways. True. Maybe that's not the end of the conversation.
No, true. Nemea, it is the largest Greek appellation. It stretches to 3,000 hectares. An Italian would laugh, but for us, this is a huge area. But it stretches from 200 meters of elevation, and it reaches more than 1,000 meters, more than 3,000 feet. So you can imagine that the same grape has a very different expression if it grows on the valley, close to 200 feet, and a very different expression when it grows high up on the mountains. So yes, we can have, for instance, an entering level Ayurvedico of relative high yield and wine made in a reductive way in stainless steel. And you may say, oh, that's, it's very fruity. It's like Beaujolais Nouveau, a bit of Gamay, carbonic maceration. So, very easygoing, very summery red wine. And then more you go higher in elevation, more the yield drops and more the grapes become more, the juice becomes more and more concentrated. And at the end of the day, you can have wines like the GAI'A estate that, at this time we are experiencing the 2000 vintage, which is already 20 years old, and it tastes like beautifully. The structure is there, the fruit is there. For a grape that we thought back 30 years ago that, well, probably doesn't age that well. It ages beautifully, basically. And then when we reach altitudes as high as 3,000 feet, well, then you get rosé, which are so fragrant and so vibrant that it's hard not to drink a bottle on your own, as I do currently.
Especially these times, Aaron.
I'm sorry?
Especially during these times.
Absolutely, yes. Well, you see, the thing is that, and I'm very confident that yet we haven't seen the full potential of this grape. We have been a bit slow. It is true. We haven't yet undertaken research for clonal selection, which we are doing presently. And at this point, we have planted some selected clones of Ayurvedico, and I can assure you that the results that we are getting are phenomenal, really. I'm sure that in the next 5 to 10 years, we will see great reds emerging from Nemea, that they will be basically based on those selected clones. Very, very different, more concentrated, more fruit, more straightforward. It really, for me, it is very, very exciting because I've been doing wines for the last 30 years in this area. And I feel at this point, just now, that we are really start to work with those grapes at the direction that we have imagined in the past. So yeah, I'm very, very, very excited for the future. Bear with us. Give us another 5 years. And I can promise you honestly that the wines that you will be getting will be, I'm tempted to say much better than the ones that we have now. They will be better, no doubt.
Well, having now watched the grape in 3 trips to Greece over the course of more than a decade and tasting them here in the US over various producers and various styles, I think that I think your analysis of Tuscany is a beautiful thing because we tend to be amazingly forgiving of Sangiovese, even though Sangiovese comes to the table in every format you can imagine, from barely, and I say this with maybe a little crude honesty, barely drinkable red wine because it was not made well. There was no motivation, all the way through the stuff that we're like, wow, I want to hold that for 30 years. So to be critical of Ayuritico, of having a range of stylistic production, would be very disingenuous of the wine world, in my opinion. And what I think is very interesting, though, is that what I'm seeing is greater level of consistency over the last 7 years, especially in that grape, in that mid-tier and up, where there's a very lovable, refreshing, fruit-driven style of wine that works great with Mediterranean foods. And I think this future is extremely bright because I think it ties into what a lot of people are turning to. In America, people are still really in love with big, big red wine, but there's a whole marketplace shifting their attention towards things that are a little lighter on the palate, a little kinder to the table. And Ayuritico is a grape that fits there perfectly.
Ron, let me add a few words about Ayuritico because it is a strange animal.
Okay.
It is not a blockbusting variety. It definitely doesn't have the tannins of a Cab or a Syrah, no doubt. I would more describe it as a mid-palate grape. Nevertheless, it does have those soft tannins where when the wines are young, you are tempted to say, well, it's not a wine that it will really age well or even improve through aging. What's very, very impressive, it is that those wines of Ayuritico evolve very, very slowly. And even 20 years down the line, the color or the structure reminds you more of a much younger wine. It doesn't collapse. It remains very vivid. Yeah. So it's a very flexible, it yields very flexible wines that we can enjoy young, since the tannins are not aggressive, but on the same time, we can cellar them for a decade or even more and end up having something far more complex. Although, as I said, it is a mid-palate variety. And then when you grow those vineyards, those grapes at this high altitude, on the same time, you can have wines that have a high degree of extraction and a lot of alcohol, but on the same time, you don't see the alcohol, right? Because the acidity is there to balance things. So I think we're very fortunate having this grape.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting thing that most of the Greek vineyards have this blessing, either because they're close to the water or they're on a foothill or they're in a mountain where the heat in the day, it might be just as warm at 2,000 feet as it was at 800 feet, but the length of time it's that temperature is different. It's going to creep up slower, cool off faster. And so those grapes in that sweet spot of that upper middle tier in today's climate, they're seeing the same amount of maximum temperature, but they're seeing it for a lot less of the day, which changes completely the veraison and how much sugar content over the course of time. And you end up, which the magic, I think, of Greek reds on the mainland especially, is that they keep a tart backbone, which makes them so wonderfully friendly. And honestly, acidity is what makes wine ageable in at least a major part. I mean, yes, tannins are part of it and all that stuff, but think of the great wines of the world that basically live just on pH.
Absolutely.
Pinot Noir, Sangiovese to a certain degree, Riesling absolutely. I think that Assyrtiko is one of the grapes that really, when you have a fully ripe wine at 14+% alcohol with a 2.8 pH, the wine is never going to die, ever. So let's pop back to Santorini before we completely run out of time. I already made a decision to go over time. Oh, it's such a beautiful place. There are more options than Assyrtiko on Santorini. I think that's one of the things we should talk about, is that there's more than just white. We have Mafrotragano, we have Athiri, we have Aidani. Talk to us about the other options, especially talk to us about the idea of Vinsanto and what that's all about.
Okay, so a bit about the other varieties. So I guess the varieties that we work with the most, apart from Assyrtiko, would be Athiri and Aidani for the whites. Okay. I'd not put those two in the same category.
No.
They're both used at the minute for mid to entry level labels, and that's fine. They're doing a perfectly fine job and very useful, because we cannot only have premium labels. But to me, Aidani has a much, much, much greater potential. I think it's very underrated. And it's sort of like our Chardonnay. It's very fruity, very aromatic. It's very distinctive. You can smell it a mile away and know that it's Aidani. And we are just now starting to appreciate its aging potential as well. It ages beautifully. And we're going to release a new label this year in Hteri, which will have some Aidani in it. It's a whole different deal. And I really love Aidani. It's really in my heart. Athiri, again, it's great for great for premium, for entry level labels. Very aromatic, not the same potential as Aidani. People tend to talk about those two together. They should not. Okay. Anyway, now for the reds. When we talk about Santorinian reds, and they're difficult, because we have Mavrotragano, we have Mandilaria, which I'm not really going to talk about because I'd rather focus on Mavrotragano, to be honest. Right. So Mavrotragano. You
want to promote anything from Crete by accident, right?
Yeah, they are quite just as acidic as our whites, which is a lot to be said about red wines. Mavrotragano is difficult, and it's difficult to work with. But what I think and what I've seen getting done, which very few people do, is that if you treat Mavrotragano and work it to produce a style sort of like Amarone della Valpolicella, it's something else. And not many people, actually only one person does it. I used to work for him, and it's just something you don't even expect, because you have the acidity, and Amarone, it's made from, what is it called?
Corvina?
Yeah, which means, it means the great bitter. So Mavrotragano means black and crisp, and it is it's very acidic. It's quite bitter, and it needs to be worked that way. It's very easily overlooked, because if you don't do it like that, you're not gonna get anything that's really worth. You're gonna get a nice, refreshing, acidic red wine, food wine, but do it in a different way, and you're gonna get a big red, and people do not expect it. And I think there's also a lot of potential there. The only thing is that it's a very tiny percentage of the vineyard. It's only about 1%. But it does have the potential for great, especially aged wines. We tried, I think, a Mavrotragano from 1998, something like that. I cried. It was ridiculous. It was amazing. So a lot of potential there. Aidani, Mavrotragano for me. Amazing. Yeah.
The Aidani I've tried by itself has also been very impressive. I love the texture. It's such a different experience texturally than Assyrtiko.
And it's so distinctive, it's so, you smell it and it's Aidani. Can't be anything else.
I believe you on that, but I've only tasted it a couple of times by itself, so I'm not ready to commit to that personally. All right, why don't we end our discussion with just a little bit of parting words about, about this idea right here. There's what I think you told me there might be like 11 people in the world who have decided that it would be interesting to age wine below sea level, literally in the sea. Crafton Estate has one of the champagne producers does that, Le Clerc Briand. And you are apparently doing it the same, and I'll be quiet so the sound can come through. The one that got away.
Oh, there's plenty.
There's plenty. That's so unfortunate. What's the depth?
20 meters, 18 to 20 meters.
Okay. And this is the.
There's a more eel. There it is.
There it is. He's trying to drink your wine.
Mm-hmm.
Is this basically the Thalacethis down, or is it a different bottling?
So basically, Thalacethis. Every year we started doing this in 2009. We started taking roughly 500 bottles of that very same vintage and chugging them down the bottom of the sea to see what happens. And we started leaving them there for 5 years at first. Then we thought that was a bit much, because at the same time as we were bringing those up, we would bring a couple of bottles of like the next year at 4 years, and we saw that was better. Because it's obviously super reductive, and that's the idea, that I don't care what kind of closure you have, some percentage of oxygen is going to get in there, but that's not possible underwater because you don't have oxygen in a gaseous form, so it cannot be absorbed by the wine. So we wanted to see what would happen if we uncoupled the aging process from oxidation, which is, they are synonymous, to be fair. And the results have been really astounding. It's been strange because you get, after 4 years, you get this evolution, especially in the minerality, that you get after, I don't know, 10 years. We've never even seen that amount of minerality before in the wines as they age on their own. And at the same time, you get this like clean, fresh look. At first it looks completely light and just clean and not aged. Somehow it doesn't affect the color, I suppose. I guess it makes sense. And you get all these like flowers and honey and stuff, and it's really weird. You get at the same time fast forward evolution, but you hold on to the freshness.
Right.
So it's been enlightening at the very best, and very, very fun as well to do.
It sounds a little bit like what happens when you do long sur lat aging for champagnes. You have a non-oxidative developmental process, and the wine actually is far more complex than it would have been, but for reasons than if you had corked it and sent it out into the market. And I think it's a really super exciting process that you're exploring. I look forward to my next trip to Greece. Maybe I'll get to plunder a bottle from you. And
you dive?
Well, you can try. You can go down there and see what's left.
I haven't dived previously, but I'd be willing to learn around Santorini. The water's beautiful. I would definitely get in. Although I'm kind of hoping instead I'll be there during wave season and we can go catch some waves on Santorini, and I can check 2 buckets off at once.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So there's some question there. Should we address it?
Yeah, and a question here. The question of
the Q&A.
Oh, here we go.
Hi, Catherine.
It might be worth mentioning this isn't available in the US. Yes, of course.
It's not even available to us.
Yeah, exactly. What, you just keep it locked down there? You don't even bring it up?
No, we bring it up, but it's like, it's a first come, first serve. There's like a list, people call the head office, and that happens way before they come out. So we might have like literally a sip. Right. Because there will be like 20 of us, just open one bottle, see if it's okay. And then we'll have a sip each, and then everything is just gone.
Okay. Well, I guess I got to get on that list. For my That's pretty awesome. No, that one's not. Yeah, Catherine Loeb, our national sales manager, definitely wants to be on that list too.
Catherine, I'll get you a phone number.
There you go.
And you can take it from there. Nothing even I can do about it.
Is there a reason why FDA doesn't allow wines aged undersea to be sold?
Their definition of it is it's adulterated because there's a possibility that seawater was able to get in and they consider that an adulterated beverage that doesn't live up to the labeling, is what it was explained to me. I think the reality is that they do is something far more simple than that, that I do not want to get my personal statement on public record about.
Okay, so
talk about that when we're not being recorded. This was awesome. I think we should actually schedule another one and do 2.0 sometime in the near future.
Yeah, for sure.
Talk about dreams and visions, and things that we should know about GAI'A and all the things that are going on there. We're going to follow up for everybody on this one, and anyone that was at the Greece webinar, we're going to send them a little blurb video monograph. And thanks, Eleni, for the thank you message, and love you guys.
Thank you so much, Ron.
Thank you, Ron.
Have a great day.
All right, guys. Everyone, be safe.
Stay safe.
We will.